37 years ago today, on September 26, 1980, the Jacksons released their album Triumph. This album was released very close on to the success of Michael Jackson's debut solo album with Quincy Jones entitled Off the Wall. And, you know, Off the Wall, obviously, was a very big part of my musical development growing up. And so was watching Friday night videos. And, you know, 1984, 85, when Thriller was still really, really huge, they would often play this long-form video where the Jacksons were these huge, giant, golden creatures showering golden dust on many people, was constantly aired. And the name of the song was Can You Feel It? I never saw it on any album by the Jacksons for years, until one day I was at a local branch of a record chain called Strawberries, you know, and I was looking through the tapes, and they had this album by the Jacksons, and, you know, it had the group, basically black and white specters surrounded by this blue electrical aura, and, you know, the cover just got to me at the age of 14, and I looked on the cassette, and one of the songs was called Can You Feel It? That was in 1994, and this was probably my first love affair with music. I remember listening to all the songs from this album over and over again on my portable tape deck at that time. And there's one memory I have strongly associated personally with the Triumph album. My grandparents, who lived in the nearby town of Stillwater, around Christmas time they used to like to go out and look at the Christmas lights around. And, you know, people would put up huge Christmas light displays then. They don't see them do it much now. And we would go out in the snow in their car and drive slowly. And, you know, they didn't put Christmas music on or anything. They just would sit there silently. And that Christmas of 1994, I put my Walkman on and I listened to this album. And I remember passing this ornate display of Christmas lights of all different colors. And the song from this album that was playing at this time was a song called Give It Up. And the ending of it is somewhat similar to Paul McCartney in Wings' song Let 'Em In. This big, otherworldly march with a lot of very bright synthesizer parts, and it matched perfectly this display of holiday lights. It felt like I was visually and orally in another world. And I'm not just being dramatic, it actually felt that way. You know, what a wondrous musical experience. You know, that memory is just something that will be with me the rest of my life. And this is an album I've listened to and had in many formats as well. I originally had this on tape, gave it to my friend Joseph. I then got the first edition of the CD, and I had it on vinyl for a while, in really pristine shape too. But when I got the remastered CD with the John Luongo disco remixes on it, I got rid of the vinyl for some reason. But recently my boyfriend Scott gave me a double of his. Now, the cover is not in the pristine condition my original vinyl copy that I had was. My mother and father got it from me at a flea market somewhere years ago, but I'm just so happy to have it on vinyl and in really good shape too. Now, what I just told you was my personal experience with this album, and now I'm going to do a bit of a review on this album. You remember what I just told you about hearing the conclusion to that, the outro to that song, Give It Up, from this album, and seeing all those beautiful Christmas holiday lights to go along with the whimsy of that? It also reminds me of that symbol, which I saw previously on the Destiny album. The idea was that Michael Jackson in particular was very fascinated by the idea of the peacock showing so many colors in its plumage when in love, and how that reflected how he wanted to get everybody in the world unified in his utopian vision through the love of music. And I just love the peacock imagery. And here we have the space peacock literally floating atop the Milky Way. It's a beautiful vision, I have to admit that. And maybe I was associating, you know, that Christmas light display with this somewhat, but the cassette didn't have this on the back. I didn't see it till I got the CD, but it's still a great imagery, but I always associated those two somehow. As far as the music on this album is concerned, Can You Feel It is an amazing musical funk cinematic soul march. You know, it starts out as a march and then it adds the funk element to it. It's an extension of, you know, the cinematic, you know, blaxploitation era, only in the post-disco boogie funk era. Lovely One, as far as I'm concerned, could have very easily come off the wall. The horn, bass, guitar bass, string based, you know, post-disco sound again. Your Ways gets right into this really spare, really eerie disco sound with these unusual jazzy chords. You know, Henrique and I always talk about how much we love this song. It's almost a precursor to the Thriller era in the way there's sort of a foreboding to it. And the first side of this album on vinyl ends with the song Everybody, which is one of my favorites on this album. You know, it just has this great A, B, and C section. You know, you hear the, you know, different sections of the song use different keys, and Michael Jackson follows it from his lower voice into his falsetto, and then right back down again, and the bass guitar on it, you know, it just grooves into your subconscious as far as I'm concerned. The hand claps, everything about it just clicks. Now, Heartbreak Hotel, speaking of foreboding, this song, I was just listening to this earlier with Scott, and, you know, it just, the music of the song actually tells a story. You start out with these strings, and then you go into this cinematic sound, and the slow, funky guitar crunch, you know, and there's this nice guitar solo in the middle of it, and then at the end, after he's talking about basically being counter-trolled by all these women who feel that, you know, they were done wrong by him, Michael Jackson wakes up in the end with more strings, and it's all been kind of a dream. It's very much a precursor, again, to Thriller, thematically. Time Waits for No One is very sad. It's kind of a Fender Rhodes-based ballad, but it has a mid-tempo element, sort of a somewhat brighter musically version of She's Out of My Life in a way. Walk Right Now, this is some furious boogie here. You know, this is one of the tracks that first got my attention on this album. The synth bass is really heavy, really brittle. Again, the chorus of it has this great cinematic, dramatic element with these big bass drum hits and strings and these keyboard parts. It's just, there's so much going on in that song. So many different, and so many instrumental parts too. You know, Michael Jackson singing goes without saying, but the instrumental parts on that song are amazing, and how much they work with Michael Jackson and his brother's backup singing. And I've already told you about Give It Up. That's another song that has an epic flavor, kind of a soft rock kind of flavor in parts of it, but it has this epic beginning. I could very much see Paul McCartney going for a song like that. Now, Wondering Who was written by Jackie Jackson, sung by Jackie Jackson in his lower voice, a very underrated singer, if you ask me personally. And it goes full-on electro-funk. Full-on electro-funk. This would have worked really well around 1983. It's very much in tune with Evelyn Champagne King's I'm in Love, and Yarbrough and the Peoples, Don't Stop the Music. The vocoders are flying everywhere. The synthesizers are just playing lightning fast bass and orchestration. It's just a tremendous cut, and ends the album out on kind of a futurist note. Kind of the Jacksons' version of I Feel Love, you could say, except that, you know, has this heavy funk element to it. And that's a review of all the songs on it. You know, and since this was made around the time of Off the Wall, it makes sense that people like Michael Boddicker, you know, Jerry Hay, Greg Fillinganes, and Paulinho da Costa were all involved in this album as well. I'm sure, you know, Michael brought them over from that album. Also, Another person who was on this album was one of my favorite and a very underrated keyboard player named Ronnie Foster. He has a great solo career. You know, you should check out some of his late 70s solo albums in particular, are very interesting. And he actually played with Stevie Wonder on his Songs in the Key of Life album. He plays the synths on Can You Feel It? And does a wonderful job with that as well. Now I'm going to take this out. You know, like I said, it's beat up a little bit, but here are the lyrics to the songs. Of course, you all know that they changed the name of Heartbreak Hotel, is the label, Epic label, to This Place Hotel. It was on the cassette. It was on the CDs. But on the original vinyl, it's Heartbreak Hotel. I don't know what vinyl reissues of this album have on it in the future, but it was meant to be Heartbreak Hotel, but they changed it not to confuse it with Elvis. So that's my review of the Jacksons' album Triumph. If you love the Jacksons and somehow you've never heard this album, what can I say? Go out and get it immediately. Live with it. Experience it. It's just an amazing experience. You know, and if you're a big Jacksons fan who hasn't taken this album out in a while, I don't know anybody like that personally, but, you know, take it out again and re-experience it. If you're a person who only listens to Michael Jackson, and I know a lot of people who are like this, people who, you know, they love Off the Wall a little bit, but they're obsessed with Thriller and the 80s and 90s Michael Jackson, go back, go to your record store and search for a vinyl, a tape copy, or a CD copy of this album immediately. You will find the roots of everything Michael Jackson would do on his big 80s blockbusters right here on this album, and you will understand something I've known for years. When I read the Michael Jackson tribute magazine in Time, it described the Jacksons as a great imbalance of talents. And when you hear this album, you will realize not only how talented Michael Jackson obviously was, but how talented these guys, these brothers, were as a unit. Because you hear how strong a guitar player Tito actually is, and you hear what great writers and singers, and in the case of one of them, musician, that Jackie and Randy actually are. And you know, Randy was actually a survivor. He had had a car accident around this time that almost killed him. They had to take the jaws of life to get him out. So this Randy Jackson was a survivor. So, you know, this was the Jacksons in a very unified place. Michael was becoming a solo dynamo, but he was still a unified part of the group. And this is a collaborative album. Michael Jackson is the lead singer on almost every song on this album, but the spirit of collaboration is there, and you can tell this is a band of brothers who have been through Motown, been through fights for creative freedom between Motown and Epic, and have finally found their voice. You know, Michael Jackson himself said in the Michael Jackson illustrated record by Adrian Grant that he felt that Triumph would be a more creative album than their previous album, Destiny, had been. They had done that themselves, but they were rushed. They had to prove to Epic they could write, and that on Triumph they could be more creative and be more adventurous. And did they go for that on this one? This album is drama, cinema, funk, disco, boogie, add what you please, all put into one. When you see this cover with the Jacksons literally electric, it's exactly what you're going to hear within this. This is electric music. Even the slow parts of this album have an electricity. And I'm not saying that as a big fanboy of this album. This album is just very impressive. Re-listen to it if you've already heard it. And if you're a big fan of Michael Jackson and don't know the Jacksons' work, again, seek this out on whatever you can find. It's a wonderful album, and I'm happy that it's endured with fans of the Jacksons, and in a lot of cases Michael Jackson, over the years the way it has. Happy 37th anniversary, Triumph. I hope you enjoyed this review. Peace.